Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll be making this coquette lined shoulder bag. This is a beginner level project and an in-depth tutorial on how to line not just this piece, but any pieces that you make in the future. Let's get right on into it, and good luck. For materials today, you will need 200 grams of one weight for yarn and less than 50 of another, as well as less than 50 of a thin weight yarn. You'll need some scrap fabric, fabric scissors, a darning needle, and a hook in between 5.5 and 5 millimeters. You'll also need a needle and thread, and please head on over to my Instagram to get yourselves the written pattern. For step 1, you are going to start by making a slip knot and chaining 35. This will be the foundation for the front and back panels of the piece. This is where you'll take your hook after making your slip knot, insert it right on through, and then begin your chains. If you've never done this before, I recommend checking out this video here on how to do all the basics of crochet. Once you've made your chain, it should look just like mine, and then you're ready to make row 2, which is when you'll be doing your half double crochets. To do half double crochet, you're going to yarn over once, skip that last hook, and go into the next one. If you've never done a stitch like this before, know that we're skipping that first one because it lets us do a little bit of a turn here. So it'll be 34 half double crochets across. You're going to continue this half double crochet all the way down, and when you get to your last stitch, you want to make sure that you're going into it, not just skipping it because it looks like it's part of that knot that you made. That's the final stitch. You'll finish it up here and then chain 1 to finish off this row. You'll be able to distinguish each stitch like this. They're very prominent since we're using a lighter yarn. After you're going to turn your work. After you've turned your work, you're going to begin half double crocheting again, this time making sure you're going into the stitch straight here, not the one right above it. So you want to make sure that you're going directly into the stitch from the side, not through the pieces on the top. From there, you're just going to continue doing this all the way across for 26 rows, chaining once after each and turning your work. Once you reach the end, you're simply going to cut your yarn and then pull straight through like so, pulling it really tight to make another knot. For step 5, you're going to create the front panel, which is just the exact same as the last one, this time doing 16 rows instead of 26. We'll quickly do a shape check-in, make sure your piece looks exactly like mine up to this point, and then we can continue. We're going to make the pockets next. This is very simple, it's just following exactly as I write it. Start with either a chain ring or a magic ring. A chain ring is simply a slip knot with 4 chain stitches, slip stitching into the first one to create a loop. I know a lot of people absolutely despise making magic rings, so I always like to give this option as well, even though I personally believe a magic ring works better. But like I said, once you've chained 4, you're going to slip stitch all the way through, and then you continue on going into that hole. A magic ring is a better option though, and to do one, you are simply going to start by wrapping the ring around your 2 fingers, index and middle, crossing them into this X, and then threading your hook in between those 2 stitches, twisting and pulling straight through the top. I have a much slower crochet tutorial in that one I linked to earlier. After you've done either the chain ring or the magic ring, you're going to begin step 2, which is to simply begin to add these 8 half double crochets inside of the hole. You're going to do this the same way you would add them to a stitch, just make sure you have a nice good grip on either ring to make sure nothing loosens or that you don't lose your spot. Again, you're going to be making 8 of these total, and then we're going to continue by slip stitching it shut, no matter which ring you did. If you chose a magic ring though, make sure that you pull your tail taut first, and then do your slip stitch. Make sure for the slip stitch that you're not going into either of those little chains we did beforehand. You want to go straight into the first half double crochet you made, and then you'll simply pull through and pull through once more, chaining 1 after you do so. After you've chained 1, you're going to begin to follow this pattern exactly as it's written, starting by adding 4 half double crochets all into that first stitch. If you've never done something like this before, I promise they will all fit. You just have to be very careful to make sure that you're going into the same stitch every single time. From there, you are going to slip stitch into the next 3 stitches, so that would be stitches 2, 3, and 4, and then chain 2 after you've done so. This is how you create the slant for the heart that goes into the little point at the bottom. And again, be very gentle as you go. You want to make sure you're going into each individual stitch. Next, you're going to be doing what you just did in reverse, starting with a slip stitch in stitches 5, 6, and 7, so 3 times, and then into the 8th stitch, which is your last one, you'll be doing 4 more half double crochets. If you get lost in this part, I recommend going through it all again or sending me a quick DM on Instagram if you're really stuck. I do not mind helping at all. For step 6, you're going to slip stitch into that little middle piece that's left over, pulling through one loop and then the second. You're then going to do a color switch, which replaces the chain that you normally do. You do this by simply pulling straight through with the other color yarn that you have, and then trimming your ends so that way the tails can be weaved in. There are plenty of other ways to do a color switch, but this is the way that I teach because it's the most practical and looks the cleanest. Once you're done, you're going to begin with this pattern, starting with 2 half double crochets, 1 double crochet, and then chaining 2 to form the first corner. As you do this part, I want you to make sure that those 2 yarn tails that you have sticking out get weaved in between each one of these stitches. To do this, make sure that you yarn over first and then insert your hook, and then lay those 2 tails above your hook and below the yarn so they get kind of sandwiched in between. This way you won't have to weave anything in afterwards and everything will look super clean as you go without being bumpy or without having anything poking through. But continue with the pattern. Like I said, you're going to do 2 half double crochets and then 1 double crochet afterwards. After your double crochet, you're going to be chaining 2, which is the foundation for the first corner. After you chain 2, you're just going to do 3 double crochets and then chain 2 more. This kind of forms the sides here, which is going to be slightly shorter than the top to make that pocket shape. So again, 3 double crochets, making sure that you're not going into the same stitches on your pink heart or whatever color you chose more than once. It is crucial that this part is done very carefully or your pockets will come out uneven as you're going through them later. So make sure you are counting very slowly, going into each stitch only once, and following this pattern exactly as I say to do so. And if you're like me, sometimes it's a little hard to get into one of these stitches if you pull them too tight, so just carefully readjust, don't get frustrated, and quickly go through it all. And then once you're done with your 3 double crochets, you're going to chain 2 more to make your next corner. As you can see, they form right angles really nicely, which is how we're going to get that granny square shape. Once you're done, you are going to do 1 double crochet and then 1 half double crochet afterwards, making sure once again that you go very carefully into each and every stitch. I just really want to reinforce that part because if you end up doing more than one in one, it's going to stretch out the heart and the shape of your square is going to be totally messed up. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you need help at all during this part. And also, ignore here, I accidentally make 2 double crochets in a row. I did go back and fix it later, but do as I say, not as I do. Finally, you're going to finish off here with your half double crochet, and this should be pretty much exactly where the point of your heart is. And then from there, you're going to repeat every step we just did in reverse, doing that half double crochet, then a double crochet, and so on and so forth until you get back to the start. Once you reach the start, you're going to slip stitch into that first half double crochet that you made. This will be the brown or whatever color you chose and not the color of the heart. For step 13, you are going to just add 1 half double crochet into each stitch, and then when you get to those 2 chains that you made for the corners, you'll be adding 2 half double crochets into them. To do that, you're simply just going to half double crochet normally, and then pull the chains apart so you're just getting 1 little loop at a time, going 2 times into each of those, so that way the corners expand and you don't get a bowl shape, if that makes sense. If you weren't doing this, it would form upwards. When you're done, chain 1, and then continue to row 14, where you're doing the exact same thing over again. The only difference is you don't have those chains in the corners, so this time just count the 2 corner pieces and do 2 into those. When you're done, you're going to chain 1 and cut your work, pull it through, and repeat everything that you just did for a second pocket. Then you're just going to weave in your ends however you choose. Just these 2 pieces in the back are easy to tie together. Then you can cut them and trim them however you please. Then that little piece at the top, I recommend weaving in with a hook the way I do it, but if you prefer the darning needle, you could do that too. In this next section, we're going to be making the straps and the bows for the bag. You're going to start the main strap first, starting with a slip knot and then chaining 180. That number is a bit large, but that's to account for going all the way around the bag when we attach the strap, as well as going up and over your shoulders. After you've made your long chain, you're going to do a color switch, going back to that secondary color used for the hearts, this time half double crocheting all the way down your row. So start with the color switch like so, trim your yarn tails so we can weave them in just like we did before, and then like I said, you want to half double crochet once in each one of these chains all the way down to the other side. This part is a bit time consuming, but again make sure you take it nice and slow so that way you make it to the end without any mistakes. Adding like decreases or increases can mess this whole thing up. And also make sure again that you're weaving in your yarn tails, pulling them as you go, and making sure that they're totally tucked in. Once you make it to the end, you're going to chain one and turn your work, and then repeat the last row over again, half double crocheting all the way across once more. This is probably the most time consuming part though. Once you're done with this, it's back to nice and easy breezy. At the end of that row, you're going to do another color switch, going back to your main color so you can slip stitch all the way across the row. As you're slip stitching, you can't really weave in these ends since you're just going straight through, so don't worry about trying to do anything. I would pull the tails out of your way so you don't end up slipping through them on accident though. And remember, when you're doing a slip stitch like this, you want to very carefully insert it through. This time not through the whole stitch, just through the back part of it, if that makes sense. So when you do a half double crochet, you usually go straight through. This time you're only going through the back part of the stitch. When you reach the end, make sure you don't skip that little corner. You want to make sure it's totally flat. Then you're just going to chain one and cut your work right afterwards. Pull the yarn through once more, making sure that all the ends are tight and you're done with the main strap. For your little clutch straps, you're just going to make a quick slip knot and chain 30. Then you're going to end with a color switch instead of chaining one or anything, and we're going to switch back to that secondary color again. Just as we have been doing, you're going to half double crochet all the way down this row, again weaving in your ends just like you did before. At the end of this one, you're going to color switch one more time, not doing a second pink row like the main strap, and then when you get to your original color, you're not going to slip stitch this row either. This time you're just going to half double crochet across normally, weaving in your ends once more. The reason we're doing this differently than the main strap is just for aesthetic purposes. If you like the look of the other strap better, you can do that one as well, but I like that having a small difference here kind of makes the bag look a little bit more expensive and like a lot more detail is put into it. So again, you're just going to half double crochet normally, weaving in your ends as you go. And of course, repeat this all again for the second strap. The bows are extremely easy. You're going to start by making a slip knot with your thinner yarn, and I recommend an option to use a smaller hook if you want a tighter bow, but start with your slip knot and then chain 100 times to get to the end of the bow. Of course, if you want longer bows, make them longer, or shorter for shorter. When you're done, you're going to cut your yarn and pull through, evening your little yarn tails, and then simply tie it into a bow. Make a second one of these, of course, so that way you can have two to attach to your bag. Realistically, you can add way more if you would like, but I just make two. Now we'll move on to actually lining the piece. You want to start by tracing and cutting out all of those straps and panels that you just made, minus the little clutch straps, since we're not going to be lining any of those. To line a piece, directly put it on top of your fabric and just use a marker to lightly trace around them, leaving a little bit of wiggle room for when you're cutting. Then when you get to the actual cutting part, go nice and easy. Don't cut too close to the line because you want to leave yourself a little bit of room. I also want you to keep in mind for the main strap, you only need to make enough of the fabric to go around the parts that are on the inside of the bag. From here, get a needle and thread, making sure you have enough for the entire project. I like to cut mine first and thread the needle, then I will start to pull things apart since I'm using embroidery thread. You don't need to do this if you're using regular thread, but I'm doing it this way to get the exact color match that I want. And I apologize for the blurriness of the video here, I'm not sure why it didn't focus. Continuing, make sure you thread your needle and knot it a few times at the end to make sure it doesn't pop through the fabric or through your crochet piece. When you're done, you're going to grab the actual pieces themselves and then do a running stitch through each stitch of the crochet. You're not going to go through a random point here. I want to make sure that you're going directly through the stitches the same way you would if you were actually crocheting another row. This is going to make it really easy when we attach all the pieces together because there's not going to be any yarn for your hook to get stuck on. So insert first through the fabric, making sure that that knot is up against the fabric, and then start to stitch directly through each crochet stitch you have. If you've never sewn before, we're doing something called a running stitch, which is the most simple form of going in and out of each piece. Once again, my DMs are open if you'd like a little bit more help on this part if you've never done it before. But again, go through every single one of your stitches all the way around your piece, not pulling too tight so you don't ruffle the fabric, but not being too loose so that things can slip in and out of it. Keep your tension just nice and average. Once you've made it all the way around, you're going to want to cut your thread and leave a decent enough piece behind so that way we can tie it into a knot. So if you look about here, I'm leaving a good 4 inches, 3.5, 4 inches, pulling my two tails apart, and then tying them together the same way you would tie any normal knot. This method just makes it really easy to not have anything unravel on you. So make sure you tie it maybe 2 or 3 times before cutting your yarn to trim the tails. After you know that everything is all good like so, I'm just tying it once more because I'm really paranoid about things coming undone for when I sell them. So tie it really tight, grab your scissors, and make a nice little trim right here. Now sometimes it happens where you have too small of a piece left over and it's impossible to tie, especially with longer nails like I have. When you end up in a situation like this, I recommend grabbing some pliers or tweezers and tying the knot using those. It'll be a little bit easier to grab them and pull it all through. So separate your tails first, the same way you would before. Tie it up against your finger the way I'm doing it here, and then use a thin plier or a thin tweezer. These are just jewelry pliers that I'm using. And pull it straight through like so, slowly so that nothing comes undone. From here, just knot it a few more times. The final step to actually doing each piece of fabric is trimming up and around as close as you can get to your stitches. Again, this is for when we attach the bag later to make sure that we don't get stuck on anything when we're actually using the hook. Try very hard to not actually cut the piece itself or to cut any holes in the fabric. Your pieces should look like this when they're done. From there, you're just going to want to repeat this part of the process to every single other piece of fabric as you go, starting by lining it up, making sure you sew evenly, trimming everything, and then you're done. We'll do another quick check-in here to make sure that your pieces are lined like mine. We're going to start the attaching process with the actual pockets on the front. This is where you're going to want to grab your darning needle and begin to go through both of the yarns of the pocket and the panel itself. Since they're lined with fabric, you're not going to be going all the way through the stitch, just through the corners of them. So I'm starting in the center here to make sure that this is exactly where I want it, but you can start in a corner too if you're confident. It won't matter either way. So first insert through each stitch on the pocket, then go underneath through the panel first, and then back up through the pocket. This again is called a running stitch, where you're just going in and out of each thing. Be very careful and make sure that your pocket is lined up exactly where you want it to be, and then the rest of this is really easy, just pulling in and out. Since I start in the center, I turn it around afterwards to finish. When you're done, you're going to cut your yarn and begin to weave in your ends, making sure to do a little knot into the panel itself, so that way these pockets don't come undone and just fall right off. I'm choosing a stitch that's slightly behind where the pocket covers so you won't see it when you're wearing it, pulling my yarn through and then knotting it over itself. To do so, you're basically just making a chain here and then pulling it straight through to the other side, and then just readjusting by pulling your yarn. After you've made a little knot, you're going to want to make sure that you tuck that little end in as well, doing this to the other side to make sure that the pocket can't come off. And then again, making sure you tuck everything in so they can't be visible when you're wearing it. You can even use your scissors to trim it a little bit once you're done. From there, you just want to attach the other pocket on your own. Moving on, we're going to work on actually attaching the main strap to the panels. You're going to start by making a slip knot and then lining up your panel and your strap with the fabric side facing out. So basically we're going to be working with this piece while it's inside out. Make your slip knot first and then attach it to your hook before you insert your hook into the piece. You're going to go into the corner of the panel as well as the corner of your strap as well. You want to make sure you're starting on the end of the strap here so that way everything lines up nicely when it's done. So very gently push it through both corners, and then you're going to begin making single crochets all the way across the bag. What's important to do during this part is make sure that you're not doing too few or too many stitches along the side. I'm doing exactly 24, which is at 16 rows plus 2 in every other, if that makes sense. So you would do 1 in one stitch, or where it looks like the row would end, and then 2 in the next one. And then continuing, it would be 35 stitches into the bottom. We're doing it this way because of exactly how many chains we made for the strap itself, making sure that you add 2 extra chains to each of the 2 corners at the bottom. This will make it nice and poofy and round. When you get to the end, you're going to chain once and then cut your yarn here, pulling it through, and we're going to readjust with the back panel and a different slip knot. Also, if you need to, you can trim the little fabric you did on the end and retie your ends here. Now moving on, grab your back panel, keep that inside out as well, and make another slip knot so we can attach this part of the panel. This time it doesn't matter if you do your hook first or your slip knot first, just make sure you're going into the chain on the strap first, adjacent to where the last one ended, the way I'm showing you here. Go straight into that one, then line up your back panel and go into that stitch as well. It'll be just about where the middle is, or 16 stitches up the side, so 16 rows. From there, you're just going to continue with the same way you did the first one, single crocheting all the way around. This time though, when you reach the end, rather than chaining and cutting your yarn, you're actually going to grab the strap itself so you can get to the other end. Make sure it doesn't loop over itself and that it's totally laid out flat before pulling it over so you can attach this again with single crochets. This is really easy. You'll use about 4 single crochets or 3 depending on how strong you want it, single crocheting into each part of the end and each part of the bag. It's a little hard to explain. It's better if you just watch me do it here, making sure that you're not going through the fabric and that you're not pulling anything too tight, but you do still want this to be nice and sturdy. At the end, you're going to want to slip stitch once more into both the chain of the strap as well as the chain of the bag. This way it's nice and sturdy and it can't pull as you're wearing it. Once you're done doing your little slip stitch, and I know it's hard to see because we have all these yarn tails in the way, you're going to want to chain once. So start by slip stitching into that little corner, pull everything through, do your chain 1, and then you'll finally be able to cut your yarn here. From there, you're going to weave in your ends however you see fit. I hate using the darning needle, so I just use my hook to pull it all through. You're then going to want to attach your clutch straps, so that way you know where you want your bows to go afterwards. Count 8 stitches in on both sides, grab your darning needle, and just simply do a quick running stitch through both the panel and the strap here, so that way it's connected nice and strong. I just do 3 loops total, making sure that I leave enough of a tail at the end so I can make a knot, which will be the next step. But first, make sure you stitch everything in nice and strong, leaving those little tails at the end before you cut them. After you cut your yarn, I'm zooming you guys in here to show you how I make my knots once more. Simply choose a piece really close or directly underneath of the strap, pull it through once, and then do your little chain-like stitch here, where you just pull the chain all the way through to make a knot. When you're done, use your fingers to just pull it nice and tight, and do the same thing to the other tails that you have remaining. This is the easiest way to clean everything up and make sure that it's still really strong, even if the bag is full of heavy stuff. When you're done with that, you simply want to insert your hook underneath the strap here so you can pull those tails in. Since the strap is so sturdy, they won't pop out at all, they'll just be hiding in between the fabric and the panel itself. To attach your bows, you're going to want to line them up directly underneath of where the clutch is, and then you're going to use a darning needle to go once through the top of each bow and once through the bottom of each bow. So it's basically like if you were to take those little loops here and there, like I'm showing you in the video, going through the actual clutch of the bag and then up through each of the singular stitches. This is going to keep it so the loops lay down flat and the strings can still flow in the wind and look super cute. So again, once through both of the tops of these bow loops, carefully with your darning needle so nothing breaks, and then you're going to use those 2 ends like I'm showing you here and go through the bottom of each of those loops. You'll likely need to remove your darning needle to make this part look really nice, so first going through the one side here, the way I'm showing you, and underneath of the panel underneath, very gently so that way nothing gets stuck into the strings themselves, then reattaching your darning needle to the other side like so, pulling everything through and going back through the bottom of the other bow. Again, we do it all this way so it all lays super flat and nothing ends up ruining the string of the bow itself. Once you've pushed it through so it's directly under the bow like this, you're going to want to grab those two pieces underneath, pull them taut, and tie them into a little knot before trimming your ends. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I want to give a big thank you to everybody for 1,000 subscribers. I have so much stuff coming in the future, both on Depop, Instagram, and YouTube. Check out my new banner, by the way. It was made by one of my friends, and his link to his Instagram is in the description. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next week.